Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a world explorer, megalithomaniac, and author of Earth Grids, the secret pattern of Gaia's sacred sites, co-author of Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files with Jim Vieira, Stone Circles, and is published in 3 Ancient Origins ebooks. He has been a regular guest on History Channel's Ancient Aliens and Search for the Lost Giants, and has been on the BBC, SkyTV, and is currently involved in several documentary projects. He is a video producer who publishes regular films of his worldwide explorations at youtube.com/megalithomania UK. As well as organizing the annual Megalithomania conferences and tours, he co-organizes the Origins Conference in London with Andrew Collins and has spoken at events in the UK, Malta, France, Peru, Egypt, Bosnia, Cambodia, Java, and North America. He currently lives in Wiltshire, England. Welcome to the show, the man, Hugh Newman. What's up, brother?
Yeah, all good, Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing amazing, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. It's the last time was in rather sunnier climes in Egypt, wasn't it? Amazing place.
Yeah. So we got first connected with the Resonance Academy in Egypt. I had the privilege to explore the pyramids with you, but also to get introduced to your work. You did about an hour presentation, and it felt that maybe just a week to yourself, we would start to graze the surface of the incredible work that you're doing and you have done. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a background on how you got to where you are today, and then we'll dive into whatever interests you most, because it's a really deep field of study that you're in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the main stuff really is the ancient megalithic sites and the sort of mysteries that surround them. But more recently, in the last 5 or 7 years, I've been getting into studying quite a strange phenomena, the whole story of the giant skeletons that keep being discovered all over the world, specifically in North America. But I'm just really into like earth mysteries, ancient sites. I've been really researching that for the last decade or two, quite thoroughly, and all off my own back. I work with various people, but we're independent. We're not sponsored. We don't have like any universities or anything behind us. We do it all ourselves. Yeah, and organise events and tours, to many of these ancient places, and obviously Egypt being one of them, where we were hanging out on the Resonance Academy Delegates Program, which was remarkable, amazing trip. And yeah, it's Peru, Britain, and many other places around the world is where we take groups to do these tours.
Yeah, incredible, man. And so how many sacred sites have you been to so far?
God, I haven't really counted, but probably hundreds, maybe in the thousands, I would imagine. I do get around. I mean, we move, in one day you can visit several sites if you move quick enough, you get up early enough. But it really depends where you are, because, in Egypt, the Giza Plateau has multiple sites within its kind of, within its area. And you can nip around many different sites in one go. In England, going from one megalith to a stone circle to a mound somewhere else. So, but yeah, I mean, the world is megalithic. It's a megalithic world out there, and we really need to kind of, encourage people to check out these sites. And even in North America, people don't realize that there's over 100,000 recorded mound and earthwork sites, which is where many of these giants were discovered, mainly in the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, and places like this. And so, even in places you don't expect to find them, there's sites everywhere. And I just encourage people to get out and get a feel for them, get out on the land, and investigate your local records, because there's always some mystery, some magic associated with them.
Yeah, fascinating. So have you been to a site where you actually found some of the remains of the giants? And man, I have so many questions. So let's just start with that one, and then I'll just try to ask them strategically.
Sure thing. I mean, yeah, well, we haven't. I mean, nowadays all the bones of the giants have disappeared. But if they were in England, they probably disappeared 500 or 600 years ago. Here in North America, they've been gone for the last 200 years, probably since the first settlers were moving over there and digging into the mounds. And so there's not much left really. I mean, the most recent giant discoveries are really like 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago in North America. Um, there's reports of others around the world, like in Russia and Iraq and other places more recently, but the evidence is really tight on it. It's really hard to kind of get access to anything, especially in North America, because technically it's completely illegal with the NAGPRA law, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which came in 1990. And before that, the Smithsonian Institution were disappearing many of the bones, the skeletons, the skulls. And actually, that's one of the big issues we have in this, what we call giantology research, where you just can't get access to what we want to. But the accounts are so abundant. There's at least 1,500 accounts of giants just in North America that myself, Jim Vieira, Mikey Ewers, Ross Hamilton, and others have collated over the last few years. Many of them are reported by academics and archaeologists, even doctors and surgeons who were kind of digging the foundations for their houses and things like this. And literally every part of North America has reports of these, going from Channel Islands off the coast of California all the way up to Maine in the northeast and New England. And so, right down to Florida, everywhere else in between. And so you have to really take this seriously. It's a serious aspect of our history, a serious part of history which has been completely eradicated from the historical record. That is what gave us the real kind of passion for researching this, because not only were these skeletons between 7 foot and sort of 12 to 14 feet tall, discovered in ancient sites, i.e. mounds and earthworks, sometimes in megalithic sites in New England, but also the fact that it's been so well and deliberately covered up and brushed under the carpet in such a meticulous manner, you could see it as a conspiracy. And so, it makes you want to research things when you find evidence of a cover-up.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, in my research, I've seen, giant skulls come up. In ancient texts, it always talks about giants. Even in the Bible, it'll talk about giants. And then if you look at some of the work of, Gerald Clark and many others, it will talk about giants of the time. From your research, so if we set, because I think that there's two types of viewers. One is, they don't, that's going to be a big thought for them, right? Giants, come on, get real. But, what have we discovered and what do we really know about our history? So the second type is, really wanting to get into this and, is really curious about how deep this might go. So from you researching and going around and taking a look at the giant phenomenon, what have you found so far, and what are your theories on who they could have been and how many more there could be, or why they'd be covering them up, or anything relevant? What's relevant to know if they existed and from what you've looked at?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, in the Bible, you get it. I mean, so a lot of people who are into Christianity and religion, that kind of thing. There's a kind of intrigue there, because there's this whole story of the so-called Nephilim, who were born of human women, and these sort of kind of almost like light beings called the Watchers, or there's even connections with the Anunnaki and all this kind of stuff. And these are written matter-of-fact accounts of witnessing these giants in the Bible. And so you have even the story of Moses during Exodus, when he went up to the promised land, heading north into the classic Bible lands, up into even as far as Lebanon. You have him witnessing and talking about these giant beings that they had to do battle with and actually destroy them. And so that's a real question mark. I mean, are they just making this up? Is it allegorical? Is there something else going on here? But actually, there's been giant bones and skeletons discovered in that area which back this up. And then some researchers believe that they may have even eventually made their way over via Europe to North America and instigated this whole giant kind of story, which they were building the mounds and so forth. But the problem is it's a reality. People have to accept this. It's absolute reality. that especially in North America, there's just too much evidence, too many reports, too many accounts, too many academic people and doctors and surgeons and others witnessing these bones, and even having them on display in their shops. There's photographs of them. And so the fact is, we really have to question what's going on here. Because if that is the case, there's a whole kind of part of our human timeline is being completely sort of just deleted, as I mentioned. So we have to question where they came from, what is the, what's the purpose here? I'm trying to understand this. And really, to me, it's just trying to understand who we are as human beings. It's the, permanent, immortal quest to understand who we are and where we came from. If part of it's completely deleted from the historical timeline, we're never going to know. We're not going to have the full picture. So it's really important to look into this, whatever it may be, whether it's giants, whether it's these elongated skull people, whether it's extremely high precision technology, stonework that we find in Egypt and other places like Peru. What's going on here? This has to be questioned. And the dating also needs to be questioned as well as to when this was done, because it puts a whole different perspective on what we're taught in history books in college and school and things like this. But and there's more research coming out which is like proving that, number one, there were giants. There's high evidence of elongated skull people all over the world, which is another whole story. My colleagues Brian Forrester and Scott Skinner have been researching. And you have extreme antiquity, where they're finding modern humans, which go back not hundreds of thousands of years, but often hundreds of millions of years, being found in the earth. And so, this is another part of the historical timeline, which is being messed around with and not presented correctly. So I'm just interested in all these types of things, because clearly we're not being given all the information, we're not being told the full truth, and it's up to us, it's up to individuals to go out there and do their little piece to try and build a picture of what was really going on.
Yeah, man, 100%. And it's one thing to kind of see an idea on the internet or in a book or something, and then it's another thing to go and experience the place and really get into it yourself. And for me, that's what Egypt was. I looked at some documentaries, but I still had some doubt around, what they could have been. And when you're in the actual space and just seeing it for yourself and then just questioning what information you have on this, and you try to find reliable information for a pyramid that makes no sense how they built it, for example, or the megaliths that you've been in countless places in the world and looking where they're built, how they're built, the technology that would have been necessary or the engineering, and you scratch your head because we don't really have academia sharing this is where it came from, so you have a lot of independent research, and it can be a little bit unbelievable. So for somebody, as far as the giants go, is that one of your main focus, like your main curiosity, or is it the sacred sites?
Well, it's really the ancient sites is what I always fall back on. That's what my real passion is, and it gives me an excuse to go and travel the world, any opportunity as well, which is a good thing. But intrinsically linked with this are these giant skeletons, and that's really just come to my attention in the last 5-7 years, something like this, not too long ago. But it's one of these things. It's almost like a spell that was placed over it, this information, and now it's being broken, and now the information is now coming out. I think there's a reason for that. It's because in different aspects, like I said, of our history, we need to know what's really going on. And so the good thing is, like, where there's megalithic sites, where there's ancient sites, there's often stories of giants. There's often bones that have been discovered, often inside the site. Often not. Often the sites is not anything with giants. But even in Egypt, I just wrote this this 2-part article on ancient-origins.net website about the giants of ancient Egypt, and there's a whole load of stuff that's been discovered there, which no one really knows about. I mean, I think I posted it on the Resonance group from Egypt. People can have a read of it. But everywhere you go, you find this kind of evidence if you know where to look and you look carefully enough. And often you have to go into the old records, you have to go into the old archaeological digs, accounts, and journals, handwritten sometimes, and get on microfilm and libraries and things like this. It's not all on the internet, so you kind of got to do your homework. But I kind of enjoy that. It's like part of the quest for trying to work out the truth. But with the giants and the sacred sites, they're pretty much everywhere. There's traditions and folklore of giants so strongly in so many parts of the world, and it really isn't just fairy tales now. And so, I'm not kind of just into giants because they're giants or they're part of the Bible. Nothing like that. It's just a part of the bigger picture that needs to be revealed. And I feel like it's something that just kind of compelled me. It still does.
Amazing. So one of the questions I want to ask was, do you have like one or two pieces of evidence for giants that even a skeptic would really have trouble, disproving? But the second thing that I think is even more important that you touched on is you're mapping this all together. For me and my independent research, I just want to know what the heck is going on the planet. And, what I've discovered in this research is it's definitely not in school. It's definitely not common knowledge. It's definitely puts you on the outside of things. And I would be an absolute novice compared to you doing your research and your homework. But when you get out there and you do it and you go to the spaces and you find the research and you start connecting the dots, well, one story starts to shape and make sense. And that seems to be a hidden story. So for you, you could answer the first question about the evidence, but then maybe get into, what is the big picture for you? Like what is it that we should be learning and know about? Because I know Earth Grids, the talk that you did at the Resonance Science Foundation and the trip to Egypt was super fascinating, and you've done an immense amount of work there. And it's, one thing is adding up, and that is, very, very fascinating that all these sites are on specific ley lines, specific points, and do specific things. So maybe you can talk a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, if we jump back to the first part of the question, was a couple of pieces of good evidence for like that can challenge the skeptics. There's quite a few actually, but the best ones are in the Smithsonian's own journals from the late 1800s. The 5th and the 12th annual Smithsonian Journal are the ones to get hold of. They're from like the 1880s and 90s. They're huge, thick books. They're massive. They cost hundreds of pounds to get on, dollars to get online. And, eventually we got a couple of really battered old copies that were kind of falling apart. But you read through them, and this was written by archaeologists at the time. It's written by academics and scholars, all the people involved in the Smithsonian. And there's multiple accounts of between 7 and 8 foot tall skeletons in their own academic reports that they've discovered themselves. And so so it's there. It's like, that to me, that's enough just to say, look, there's no way they're going to make the mistake and mismeasure a skeleton they find. And so that to me is enough. There's other accounts, there's other academic universities, there's Maryland Academy of Sciences, there's other ones, there's Yale, who had giant skeletons in their possession they actually discovered on digs. I did a whole 30-minute lecture just about giant skeletons in the academic record for ancient origins, because that's kind of it had to be kind of addressed. We do a whole thing in the book about it as well. But when you kind of got academia mentioning it in their own records, and then the same people try to cover it up afterwards, they're doomed because it's already there. And so to me, that's enough. And there were also some on display that were photographed. We feature those in the book. Other ones that we found in the microfilm, photographs of people standing next to skeletons and kind of things like this. And so, so there's good evidence, and there's more and more evidence emerging. But the problem is it's kind of illegal to actually, go and dig up any bones. We actually know where some giant skeletons are buried. We know exactly where they're buried, but we're not allowed to go and dig them up. You'll literally be put in prison for it. So that's one of the big problems there. But I just think the context of this and other subjects that I've been looking at it's just, as you said, the lecture I did at the delegates event in Egypt. That's more about Earth Grids. That's an earlier book I did back in 2008. And it's research I'll be continuing, but it's looking at the spatial relationship between ancient sites around the planet. and realizing that they understood to a very high degree spherical sacred geometry. Now, not just around the whole planet. You can imagine the planet's like a sphere. It's pretty close to a sphere. But you look, all the different platonic solids and Archimedean solids and, the combinations. This is something the Resonance Science Foundation are really into. So we can see this kind of stuff. And where the points of these different platonic solids touch the surface are really important in ancient sacred sites, more often than not. And also the lines that connect them up, so-called ley lines, and all the grids that kind of connect up in a more complicated manner are just, and they kind of manipulate the earth energies as well. So there's a whole thing going on with that. And I believe that, number one, they were harnessing this natural energy from the earth using these different harmonic frequencies that the earth naturally produces. And I think the pyramids are partly designed for that in Egypt, and to sort of suck up the energy and kind of share it around to different areas. You may be using the obelisk and other ancient sites to sort of put it through the whole planet. But also, I think that these giant humans, one of the reasons they may have got so big, this is completely speculative here, we kind of put this idea out in the book, is that the energy they were kind of creating at these ancient sites actually stimulated growth within certain elites who lived and worked in these places. And so you have that to consider as well. But then you've got these giant people hanging around. Oh, well, actually, you're the one who can lift the big, heavy stones into place. So it kind of gives an explanation of how big stones got moved around and placed and things like this. And if you dig in to the traditions in the Bible, to the Old Testament, the Book of Enoch, and there's even a Book of Giants within the Book of Enoch that talks all about these beings, they're really into the high arts, like they're into mathematics, agriculture, geometry. They're into metallurgy and like stone construction and masonry, and they loved building, and it was their thing. And so you've got to question, when you find these traditions of giants all around the planet, they were actual giants, and they were really into buildings. They're the ones that the local stone circle builders or the pyramid builders would employ to do the heavy lifting. And so it could be a clue as to how these stones may have got moved. I'm not sure how they were carved. They were carving like 80-ton blocks of granite and doing precision polygonal stonework is a whole other story, but it could have been one of the skill sets of the giants.
Right, yeah. And you were showing in your presentation those smaller sacred geometry stones that are all over the planet, right? What's the story with those?
Well, they're like these stone spheres that were found mainly in northern Scotland and Aberdeenshire. And I've actually got one. Hang on a sec.
Nice. Yeah.
This is a copy. This is actually quite a bad copy. This is one of the worst ones there is, but it shows you got just a rough shape here. You've got like this sort of. This isn't the best one. This was found up in the Ness of Brodgar up in Orkney. It's not the most precise one, but some of these are really precise and beautiful. But you see, it's got 6 faces. It's got 6 faces all around it. And other ones have different variations. Other ones have lots. They go up to about 60 faces in some of them. But there's combinations of the cube and the octahedron, so you get nesting within the different platonic solids. You've got the icos. You've got icosahedron, dodecahedrons, and so these were being made about 3,000 to 2,500 BC, which is a couple of thousand years before Plato was even born. So you can't really call them the platonic solids anymore. Because they were much, much older, and they were created in Scotland. So most of them were found in Aberdeenshire near these specific types of stone circles. And it proves that the ancient people had a high-level understanding of very sophisticated spherical geometry, which no one should have been, apparently no one knew about that back then, especially in Britain. But more research has been done up in Orkney, which is one of the islands, it's the far tip of northern Scotland, and I went up there this summer actually to do some research with a researcher friend and my lady friend JJ Ainsworth, and she and I couldn't believe what we saw up there. Absolutely blew us away, because it could be the origin point of all the megalithic sites in Britain, and even potentially influence the whole world. and they were sharing this knowledge working with these different geometries. And so we know that the ancients were very sophisticated, not just in Britain, but potentially all over the world. But one other thing, one of the strange things is that when I went to there was a museum at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, I saw one of these there. Couldn't believe it. So these are only supposed to be up in Scotland, and a couple in England, a couple in Ireland. But there was one at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and it really blew my mind. And I did a whole video and an article about this, again, for Ancient Origins. And so it does suggest there could be connections, again, more clues to connections all around the world.
Wow, man, that's really fascinating. Really interesting. What I was curious about is because when I went to Egypt, I didn't realize how many sacred sites there are. I was just wondering if you could give a quick definition of what a sacred site would be and how many are in your estimate that we've found so far.
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. I mean, there's different interpretations of what a sacred site means, because you've got people think a church is a sacred site and a holy well is a sacred site, things like this. But if we're looking at ancient sites, just whether they're pyramids, they're stone circles, whether they're dolmens, whether they're mounds or earthworks, whether they're holy wells, there's literally millions around the planet. I mean, just in Britain alone, just for stone circles, for instance, there's over 1,000. I mean, I've done a whole little book about stone circles recently, and there's over 1,000 recorded in Britain, and there's probably another 500 around the world. And people don't realise that, the pyramids is a whole other thing. So we've got the classic pyramids of Egypt, which I believe there's at least 70 or so recorded in Egypt. There might be more. I might be mistaken there. But there's other pyramids around the world, like in Mexico, even in Peru. There's even pyramid structures in Tenerife, Mauritius, and other places as well. And so we have to kind of question, what is that all about? Even in Greece as well, there's been a stone polygonal pyramid was discovered there. And so we have to question what's going on here. There's so many of these sites, and some of them are still buried. I mean, one of the finest examples of super ancient sacred site is Gobekli Tepe in southeast Turkey, which was completely covered up, and it's a series of stone enclosures, like stone circles, with two great T-pillars in the centre and surrounding them, about 30 or 40 of them in total. And so that's 12,000 years old, which is much older than most of the other sites, like in Egypt or the stone circles of Britain. So there's new discoveries being made which are pushing the dates back. And there's just so many of these sites around the world that it's hard to put a number on how many there are.
Yeah, amazing. Way more than I anticipated when I looked at it. Originally, my thought was just some sort of architecture, or if they're going to last, even as they say, 4,000 years, that's architecture that lasted 4,000 years. And if our cities today, we all evaporated, our crappy buildings are probably going to be gone. Who knows when, they're just going to be in dust. But obviously whoever built them to last, and they're all built on mathematical principles, mathematical constants. They're linked to the stars, which is also mind blowing. And you talk about that, I think, in Earth grids as well. On a big, overall picture. So if we're kind of suspending our disbelief here, and I'm kind of wrapping my head around all of this stuff too. Do you have any theory on, was it an ancient advanced civilization? Was it ETs? Was it humans that went back in time? Some people say that. But the one thing for me that is very clear is that there was a highly sophisticated, intelligent civilization, or one human being maybe that had superpowers like X-Men, I don't know. But they're building sites all over the planet, that predate any history that we have before here. And just basic common sense is that evolution happens linearly. We go through, 1600s to the 1700s, 18, industrial revolution, the internet, technology, we go up. It doesn't go backwards, and we can't build this stuff now even close. So for everything that you've looked at, do you have any kind of theories of putting this together? Because I'm sure you spend some time rubbing shoulders with people who've done a lot of research, like actual archaeologists, geologists, physicists. And that's how you start to know and formulate, a thought of how this could have been possible and what that might mean.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, these sites around the world. I mean, you saw Egypt. I mean, you know what's going on there. Um, the sophistication is so remarkable, and moving these obelisks. I mean, just as an example, like 150-ton pieces of granite, and they're carving one of the hardest stones in the world, which is like 55% quartz, which is like really hard crystal. It's just unbelievable. But then you go to Peru, and it's the same thing there. They've got the same polygonal, cyclopean, puffy pillow-like stonework, all these protrusions on it, these little like keyboard buttons, like computerized, huge, all over these. And these stones have come from one mountaintop down a valley, up another mountain, and placed there. It's just insane. I mean, and you can't deny the similarity between Peru and Egypt, for instance. The Peruvian stonework and the Egyptian stonework is almost like the same architects, the same designers. And they're so abstract, they're so like artistic. There's a real kind of mathematical, almost alien-like quality about this all over the world, really, when you start looking. That you can understand why people think it's ancient aliens are making them. You really can understand that. It's so strange and so bewildering and overwhelming when you see these sites. This is what inspires me constantly, and it just creates so many questions that are really hard to answer. But there's lots and lots of very clever people in the ancient past. There's lots of people who were just as smart as we were, or even smarter, who could work with stone and just understood the principles. There was probably secret techniques. But again, you've got a question. It could be something completely out of this world. It could be ancient aliens. It could be giants. It could be, like you said, people going back in time. We really don't know the answer exactly how they did this, especially when you start finding sites like Gobekli Tepe, which are pushing the dates much further back to like 12,000 years ago, to the time of the dreaded A word, Atlantis, even. And so you've got that going on, and that's now bringing up questions about that again. Is there a lost civilization? Is it a landmass lost in the Atlantic? I don't know. No evidence has been found for any landmass. But around the world, we have the kind of, as Graham Hancock would call, fingerprints of these ancient gods everywhere. And so you have to kind of, take that quite seriously. And this isn't really addressed very much by academia. It's not really taken into account that, they don't believe anyone could travel around the world on boats and go across the oceans. They believed everyone moved around on land, which is ridiculous, really. Because it'd be, a much more hassle, for starters. And there's evidence of ships built everywhere, even at the Giza pyramids. There's like several beautiful Lebanon cedarwood ships that have been found buried right next to the Great Pyramid, which were probably seafaring ships. They've even reconstructed one in the museum next to the Great Pyramid, but in different parts of the world. This has been proven by Thor Heyerdahl, who, in the 60s and 70s was traveling around the world on these like reed boats and different types of ship that the ancients were using. So it does prove, he kind of proved it pretty much, that you could do that. So I believe whether there was an Atlantean city or landmass, I don't know, but there was certainly a high level and shared knowledge base that the ancients shared, probably going back to the time of Gobekli Tepe 12,000 years ago.
Wow, man, that's super fascinating. Shoot. Well, for me, like, do you have, because all of the sites are ridiculous, and I like your theory of, you're looking at the Earth grids and where they are, and they're lining up, and you look at the ley lines, and there's water underneath, and we had electricians and engineers there talking about how these can potentially generate energy. I think that would make sense if it was some sort of, the way that I'm kind of imagining is some sort of energetic system. When I watched Michael Tellinger speak, he came on my podcast a few ago, and he didn't really talk about it, but if you look at all the sacred sites, not all of them, but some of them, and you put a computer chip beside it, then it looks the exact same. Like they have the same formation. And so if we're looking at energetics and frequencies and power, it makes sense that there's a possibility that there could be some sort of large scale power grid. And if so, what was I looking at recently? I can't remember. Oh, it was Dan Winter, who is a physicist mentored by Buckminster Fuller. Yeah, you're fully aware. And he's always talking about how, it's a charge implosion where you take your aura through death. And these could have been, sites where they assisted to shoot into the sun to go into the galaxies, but you kind of go into your plasma ball or into your chi body. And, Dan Winter is a ridiculously brilliant, human being. And so that theory makes sense to me. It's possible. My thought right now is some sort of planetary energetic device, because they're all in these specific locations that harness energy, and with the possible ability to either create a field around the planet, harness energy from the planet, or within each individual sacred site, an ability to activate the human or help them, if they are adept. And this has kind of been my background, is going deep into meditation and, consciousness and exploring the mind and what's capable. Well, sometimes I'll have an experience, which Dan Winter calls a bliss experience, which I've called a Kundalini awakening or a holy shit moment. What the F was that? And it explodes your brain. So if you could control that energy into a direction, then all of these things are possible to me. So with having them all on these specific lines, what's your thought on that kind of idea?
Yeah, no, I think these were. I mean, you went in the Great Pyramid, right? I mean, on the recent trips, when you go in there, and it's like a machine. It's not really like a temple. It's like some kind of device that's being used for a specific purpose. And in each of, at least the king's chamber in that one, and other ones in the other pyramids, there's a sarcophagus which the human would probably lie in. Now, whether they began the process and got everything charged up with their energy, like their meditation or their kind of intention or whatever, or whether they were there to receive something, is a big question mark. They could have been the trigger point. They could have been the ones that actually got things moving, and that's expanded that energy through the pyramid and around the world, through the ley lines and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I see your point here, because one of the things that some good research has been done by John Burke and Kaj Halberg in their book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, also Christopher Dunn in the Giza Power Plant, and various other people like Philip Callahan and other researchers who realized that these ancient sites do harness the natural earth energies and the electric charge of underground water and cosmic energies as well, and they kind of bring the energy in and they do things with it. So if you place your seeds there in a specific spot, it will charge them up. So when you go and plant them, you'll get a higher yield and a better quality crop. This has been proven over and over again at almost every sacred site they tested. And so you've got to think, well, hang on a sec. If it's doing that to the seeds, surely it's going to be doing that to humans as well, or whoever or whatever goes into that space, the sacred space. And so I believe it would. There was like an ancient quest for not only higher levels of consciousness, but for immortality, for like continuing life somehow. And so this is certainly the case, I believe, with these pyramids and ancient sites. And so I get a sense of what you're saying might be correct. I think there's much more to it than people realize. There's much more to it that we've lost. We don't sort of think like that anymore. We're not that kind of mindset where sacred and the scientific were one and the same thing. We've kind of separated and divided everything into different kind of categories, which is like human nature, really. But yeah, I think there's something to be discovered. And I think these were they were built in stone because they were like gifts from the ancient builders for future generations to experience and work with as well. It wasn't just for their generation, just for their lifespan. It was for like future generations. So building in stone would maintain that. But then you have to look at, they chose the stone because of the qualities it may give. Different insulators, electric charge. You've got, the piezoelectric effect with crystals, and all these can have an effect on consciousness. And so, yeah, I think there's more research needs to be done to kind of really analyze these sites and, you know, work out exactly what they were used for. And imagine what it would be like if they were all working again and we were kind of experiencing the energies they were supposed to produce.
So do you think that if they were all, let's say, turned on, that it would, maybe activate an energy field, in some of the more esoteric or out there podcasts and discussions that I'm in, because I'm all about it. They'll talk about the ascension of the planet and how we're raising to a higher frequency. Do you feel like that's something that would happen if they were turned on? Maybe just like resonating, because when we look in, you go through the Resonance Science Foundation, it has a whole module on the Ark of the Covenant as a potential energy device. And so if these things can actually be activated and turned on, then if it raises that vibration of the planet, how would it affect the human being and how would it affect the planet? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's tradition in Britain and in other places around the world of what John Michel called the enchantment of the landscape. And this would be often through singing and harmonics and music and things like this, but it was never ending. It was like perpetual. It would never stop. This harmony through sound, vibration, or through singing and things like this. And you do this at all the sacred sites. There's even a tradition in Egypt that goes way, way back that kind of talks about this. And so it could be that singing and chanting and specific frequencies, human voice was used to trigger all this kind of thing. And I believe that there's, and it could be, what this is all about is this enchanting energy that would be produced by these ancient sites in combination with the human voice were the same energies that increase fertility in the seeds and crops, increase health and well-being in the human being, an enlightened kind of state as well. And I certainly believe that this is, a reality. And I think people, sort of they kind of laugh at this as an idea, really, but actually, I think there's something in there, especially when they found recently, in the last decade or so, that many of these ancient sites are built with archaeoacoustic properties in mind. It's like that when they build the sites, they must have, with all the tests that have recently been done, they must have had that in mind when they were constructing them to enable this to happen, for the tests that are being carried out to get any results. And so if that's the case, then they must have a high level understanding of acoustics. And this could have even been how they levitated and moved the stones. There's different theories about that. But anyway, that, I think what you're saying is correct. That they, when you have a whole culture all on the same page, wanting to maintain enchantment of good vibes and kind of higher level of consciousness across their culture, then why not? What's stopping us from doing it now, apart from modern, the modern culture?
Yeah, excellent, man. I think we're definitely in interesting times because, we have access to information that we didn't have before. There's podcasts like you, and back in the day, you might write a book about it, but maybe only a handful of people would see it, and it doesn't get out there. But now, really, the information is starting to disperse. And if you look into it, and if you actually start researching it rather than brushing it off, you're going to come to some problems in some research, and you'll look at a few options, and one of them will make more sense. But usually, the official story is not adequate and makes no sense. So we need people like you and Nassim and explorers going out there, kind of unearthing these things. And for you, how many sites do you know of that aren't allowed to be excavated? I know that even the Giza Plateau is only partially excavated. So we could find out, if we wanted to know about our origins on the planet, who we are. We talk about sometimes the missing link in the ape theory. And, if you look at Gerald Clark's work and a lot of the other stuff, it's the Enki and Enlil story of the Anunnaki, genetically modifying humans. And, if there is weight to that, which there is a lot of research and a lot of, very smart people with compelling arguments and research around that, we could discover whether this was true or not, or at least more about our lineage, just like you say with the giants, if we could study those and the and the elongated skulls and all that kind of stuff. So are there specific sites around the world that you would love to see researched and studied, and then, put out to the public and, given to institutes that wanted to share the information?
Yeah, I think Egypt needs to be a bit more transparent and open with what's going on there. There's so much going on just on the Giza Plateau, which is not being unearthed, not being allowed to dig up. Um, like I think again, Gobekli Tepe, only like 5% of the site has been uncovered, um, and so what's going on there is really like the smoking gun of all of this, really, because it pushes the dates back and it potentially questions the dating of all other sites on the planet, which is an important part of history that we're actually kind of going, well, hang on a sec. If this site is this technical and this sophisticated at this distant age, and why aren't these other sites this old as well? So you have to kind of question that. I think Göbekli Tepe is like the smoking gun. There has to be more excavation done there.
Where is that? I haven't heard of that one. What is it? What is it called?
Sorry, it's called Göbekli Tepe. It's in southeast Turkey, in ancient Anatolia, and it's near a town called Sanliurfa or Urfa. So it's almost on the Syrian border. So it's not exactly the most popular place to visit at the moment. But we've been there a few times in 2013 until 2015. I took about 3 or 4 visits there with my colleague and researcher friend Andrew Collins. And also went there with Graham Hancock at one of the visits, actually, the first visit. And it's a remarkable place because it shouldn't be there. There's nothing really. And there's a few other sites that are kind of maybe 8,000 years old or 7,000 years old. They're kind of interesting. There's a place called Navali Churi and a couple of other sites. But this one is just outrageous. The precision. It's like you have these huge T-shaped pillars. They're like 22 feet tall, the largest being 24 feet, which is still in the quarry, hasn't even been put in place yet. They've got beautiful 3D carvings on them. Some of them are in, really perfect 3D. It's like this sort of animal running down the side of this thin pillar. And there's no way anyone should have been doing that 12,000 years ago. And they were, she made a big bit of sandstone, or limestone, sorry. And they would carve it away and leave these amazing shapes. And then you have these abstract human forms on these pillars, with the heads with no faces, and they're just like rectangles, with these weird alien arms coming down, touching the navel, and these space-age belts on them as well, with like fox pelts on them, with like all these kind of strange computerized carvings. It is just the weirdest place, and all the statues and other artifacts they found there, all on display in the museum. And people have to go to Gobekli Tepe. It's insane. And it's going to be reopened, I think, in 6 months when they're rebuilding this beautiful roof on it, protect it from the elements. Like they've done at another site not too far from there, 100 miles or so from there, called Çatalhöyük, which is an 8,000-year-old site. Nowhere near as technically adept as this site, and it's just rewriting the history books basically. And so it's a really important site, and I could go on and on and on about it. It's people can check out. If people check out my YouTube channel, there's like 5 or 6, maybe 10 videos we've made when we were there, a couple of lectures that were done about it. It's really important. It's really kind of like there's a strong connection with Egypt now. Like I said, my colleague Andrew Collins has found this direct link that could bring these two cultures together, and even Egypt could have been influenced by the builders of Göbekli Tepe. So yeah, more research needs to be done, but yeah, I think my rant about Göbekli Tepe is over.
Amazing, man. I could see you just warming up. That's interesting. I might have heard about that site, but I haven't dived in, so I'm definitely curious to check out your videos and have a peek. And as you look into each element, you just look at Peru or you just look at Egypt, and then you realize there's pyramids in China, and then there's Turkey, Bosnia. There's these sites. All of them are just mind blowing with information in the site. They have hieroglyphs. They wouldn't have made those up. Wouldn't have been accidental, what they put on there. And it's definitely, usually not human exactly. And there's, a lot of if you look at the Sumerian tablets, it talks about all this kind of stuff too. I do have 1,000,001 questions for you, but I know that you're a busy man. You're going to Peru tomorrow?
Yeah, later this week or early and towards we're going to London for a few days, and we go out to Peru. But there's we do our annual trip out there, our tour we do with Brian Forrester, and special guests we have on the tours as well. We do them pretty much every year, and hopefully we're going out there with the Resonance Science Foundation or Academy next year as a sort of plan for that to happen, which is very exciting. But yeah, the Peruvian stuff is just insane. I mean, there's actually, weirdly, you mentioned Peru, that with Gobekli Tepe and Peru, some of the carvings are exactly the same. They're like identical what you find at Gobekli Tepe. These 3D animal carvings in relief, high relief, and you get the same things at these sites called Silistani and Cotimbo in ancient Peru, which are these funerary towers called tulpas around Lake Titicaca, which is at the origin point of the very ancient civilizations there. But officially, all these sites in Peru are only like a few hundred or only 1,000 years old at the most, and yet you have identical carvings. And so suddenly it's like, hang on a sec, who actually did the dating of this site? What's going on? So more dating needs to be carried out, because just even Gobekli Tepe is influencing what could be happening in Peru. It's very, very important.
And would you be on the side of Atlantis being an actual city? Because I know you said that word, and we're discovering some cities in the sea now, right? Like, I think the ocean's floors are like 0.001% discovered, and I've heard a few times that there could be whole civilizations down there. We really wouldn't know. We would have no idea. We have not discovered anything. So have you heard anything like that? You must have.
Not well. Yeah, I mean, my co-author who wrote Giants on Record with me, Jim Vieira, he's like a #1 Atlantologist. He absolutely is convinced Atlantis existed, and I'm not. We debate this constantly, kind of jokingly as well, but I'm not sure if there was a landmass personally. If anything, it was like a sort of a level of awareness and consciousness of a global culture, which is, I find, more likely. Although there is a lot of evidence, Plato talked about it. We've got different, psychics and different people who've got different theories that suggest there could be a landmass. One idea is that it's even under Antarctica, and there's been like a global kind of surface slippage, if you like a crustal displacement, which what Charles Hapgood and even Albert Einstein were talking about a very long time ago. And so, yeah, there could well be, but it's very badly, it's either under ice, it's been completely destroyed, or it never existed. So there's like, one of three different possibilities. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. The sites all around the world are still there to be witnessed and to learn from.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, man. Well, I just wanted to thank you for coming on and sharing this wisdom, man. I want to have you back on again after Peru and all that kind of stuff. I know you have a lot on your plate right now. But before I let you go, just anything that you want to leave the listeners with, anything you'd love to dive deeper on, something that's important for people to know, or if they want to learn more, you can go on as long as you'd like, and just make sure people can find out where they can get a hold of you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things is check out your local sites, wherever you are, in the world or in America or anywhere, because there's always stuff nearby people don't realise. They might take it for granted. It might be like an ancient mound, but for all you know, there could be giants buried in there, so it's always worth checking things like that out. And like, you often ignore what's local to you, and often that's the most interesting place. But yeah, if people want to, get in touch, they can. It's just Hugh Newman on Facebook, or they can get in touch through megalithomania.co.uk. We've got different pages and stuff on Facebook, and we just encourage people to get out and explore, really, and whether they're on their own or whether they want to join us on tours. And we do what the Resonance guys do. We do a big conference every year in Glastonbury, England, which is like the cosmic town of Britain. Every May, we do a 2-day conference. We even get private access to Stonehenge, things like this. So if people want to kind of hang out for a few days, it's very, very good fun. And yeah, it'd be good to follow this up in the next couple of months.
Awesome, brother. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. Thanks for your work and sharing your wisdom and connecting all these dots and just encouraging the exploration and sharing your work because, it's mind blowing. But when you get out there and you start doing the research and you start going to the spaces, all you can do is offer what you're coming up with and let people come to their own conclusions. And I think you're an excellent ambassador for that, for opening minds and sharing research. So thanks for what you're doing, brother.
Thanks very much, Matt. I appreciate your kind words.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Catch you in the next episode. Peace.